This week, new Commonwealth Bank data showed people under the age of 54 are bearing the brunt of the Reserve Bank's fight against inflation, while many baby boomers are living it up, outspending their kids and grandkids. The analysis of 17 million bank customers showed those over 65 had increased savings by 7%, while pretty much everyone else is draining their savings to cover the rising cost of living.
Now, this all comes as the Reserve Bank governor doubled down on her warning that it's, too early to be thinking about an interest rate cut. And the RBA won't hesitate to hike rates again to get inflation in check. So lots of nervous people with mortgages around. Now, Richard Dennis is the Executive Director of the Australia Institute. He joins us now from Canberra this morning. A very good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning.
All right, so we've got these two sort of generations, one seemingly living it up and the other sort of struggling. Talk to us about this disparity in wealth across the generations. How did we get to this point?
Oh, look, it took decades of hard work to create this much inequality. For decades, we've been loading up pain on younger people in all sorts of ways, but particularly through things like making going to university a lot more expensive, while we've been giving very large tax concessions for superannuants for decades. So it's taken a lot of time and effort to create this inequality, but it's very real and it's having very real consequences, as this new data shows.
When this issue is discussed generally and casually, many of the older generation would say, well, I worked hard, I scrimped and saved, and that's why I can, enjoy my retirement. And if you, younger generations, would do the same thing, would have the same values, you too can lead an easy life. Is it as easy as that?
No, it's not. And let's be clear, there's a lot of older people living in real poverty. We have to be clear to understand that not everyone who's over 65 is cashing in on tax concessions for their multi-million-dollar superannuation. Let's be clear, there's some very low-income older people, particularly women in retirement right now, and we're not helping them. And we're not doing much to help a lot of low-income young people who are paying $50,000 to go to university or working for very low wages in the aged care homes to look after these older Australians that are doing so well. Yeah. So we have to be careful to think all the old people are doing well and all the young people are doing it tough. But with high interest rates, people with $1 million in superannuation are doing very nicely out of those high interest rates, but people who owe $500,000 on their house, well, they're really hurting thanks to those same high interest rates.
I do wonder whether the baby boomers would be the last generation who can actually retire, who can actually not work for, after a certain age and enjoy an easier life.
Well, they're the last generation that benefited from good policies like free education, like free healthcare. Keep in mind that when the baby boomers were younger, they didn't need to buy expensive private health insurance. Keep in mind when they were younger, they didn't have to repay $50,000, $60,000 HECS debts. So let's be clear, young people in other countries like Norway or Denmark or Sweden, they're not suffering the way young people in Australia are, because while in Australia we subsidise our fossil fuel industry, in the Nordic countries, they subsidise university education. The choices our governments make are driving these painful divisions in our society.
All eyes, of course, are on the RBA every month. The government says that it respects the RBA's independence when it comes to raising or reducing interest rates. Are there other levers the government can activate to achieve, more equitable wealth levels?
There absolutely are, and the Reserve Bank only has one lever. The Reserve Bank only has the lever of interest rates, but for Australia as a whole, there are lots of other levers we could pull. Imagine, for example, if we made childcare free again the way we did during COVID. We know it's possible because we did it during COVID. We know it's possible because other countries do it. If we made childcare free, it would not only lower the cost of living for young parents, it would lead to an increase in the labour supply and push inflation down, and we'd have lower interest rates. So there are ways that we can spend government money to lower inflation, and free childcare would not only achieve lower inflation, but it would really lift the cost of living on working young families.
I wonder, though, you're talking about government policies that are affecting this generation, this younger generation. These are future voters, of course. Wouldn't it make sense to try to appease them, to try to make them comfortable?
Oh, it absolutely would. But historically in Australia, politicians have believed that older voters are more concerned, that older voters are more active, and that older voters are better at speaking up for themselves. That's why we have something called the Senior Australian Tax Offset, which, get this, is a tax cut for older Australians and older Australians only. Imagine if we had the Young Australians tax offset. Why do we have a Senior Australian tax offset and not a Younger Australian tax offset? Because previous governments felt the pressure of older voters. But with the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis, I think it's very risky for governments these days to assume that young voters aren't going to swing their votes around chasing better, fairer policies for them.